Is Younghoe Koo on the verge of being replaced? And if he is, why does it feel so much like deja vu?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Falcons is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the FanDuel app. Now, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Mr. Drew, aka the Jolly Green Giant, aka Mr. aka, and I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 20 years, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong, coming up on 9 years this Thanksgiving, here as the humble host of the Locked On Falcons podcast. And I thank each and every one of you, whether you decided in the last 9 minutes to tune in, or you've been here for 9 years, or even possibly longer. Right? I appreciate each and every one of you that go strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today's episode, we are talking about, can the Falcons move forward without Drake London in the lineup? We'll talk about Zach Robinson's growth as a play caller and some of the areas where he still needs work. But we'll start with the big topic of the day, which is, are the Falcons planning on replacing Younghoe Koo anytime soon after he missed a very makeable 44-yard field goal that would have sent their week one game into overtime? And of course, the reason why the kicking is the center of the conversation is because it was the center of a conversation for a large chunk of last year, where Koo came off of a very down 2024 season. And according to head coach Raheem Morris, who spoke to the media on Monday afternoon, the Falcons are planning on Tuesday, as is typically in the NFL, the workout day when you bring in guys for tryouts and workouts. On Tuesday, as many of you are listening or watching this, the Falcons are planning on working out a number of kickers, some veteran guys that they're going to bring in. Now, Raheem was also asked about Lenny Krieg, the German sensation, who the Falcons have currently on their practice squad as an international player. And I'm paraphrasing here, but basically Raheem said he's in the mix, right? And to me, this is notable because, it's kind of, the chicken's coming home to roost when it comes to a conversation we had during the summer, before training camp, where we wondered, on this podcast, is Lenny Krieg real competition for Younghoe Koo? And we were skeptical at the time. And the fact that, we're now pivoting off of Younghoe Koo potentially 1 week into the season, which was certainly not something that we planned on doing. But, it seems like the Falcons aren't ready to pivot immediately to Lenny Krieg, as was sort of seemingly the plan from the jump. And we mentioned on that episode prior to training camp that if the Falcons were going to have a real competition for Younghoe Koo, we're going to bring in someone that was going to be a legit challenger for Younghoe Koo, it probably wouldn't have been Lenny Krieg, given his youth, given his inexperience, given the fact that, playing in the European League, that he wasn't a particularly productive kicker in the European League, and making that jump to the NFL was, a guy that was a career like 60-70% field goal kicker in Europe is probably not going to be a guy that's going to come into the NFL and kick 90% like you would expect for anybody who suits up for the Atlanta Falcons. And we talked about how if the Falcons were serious about bringing in real competition, they would have brought in, just to use an example, it'll be very curious if they bring this person in on Tuesday, Rodrigo Blankenship, who's coming off a very successful season in the United Football League this spring. It was, the most productive kicker in the UFL this past spring, and he would have been a legit challenger for Younghoe Koo. That would have been a real competition. And so we'll see who the Falcons bring in. We'll see if the Falcons decide to pivot off of this. I'm not expecting it at this point. That I do think Koo will be given at least one more game. I think this is the Falcons trying to get their ducks in a row, see what's out there, as opposed to they're going to sign a guy tomorrow. They may sign a guy to the practice squad. They have that luxury. If they do like what they see from any of these players that work out, we'll see if Rodrigo's part of that conversation. But it gets back to, and this may be controversial to a lot of folks. I don't think betting on the Falcons basically made a bet that Koo was going to rebound. And I don't think that was a bad bet. Now, I don't think that means it was a good bet. It was certainly a bet that could have gone a number of ways. It could have gone bad. It could have gone, whatever. But like, I think because of hindsight, particularly coming off of this game, everybody's going to be like, that was a terrible bet. I had a Locked On Falcons Insider basically say, Koo is going to cost Raheem his job. And, my immediate reaction was like, that's kind of an overreaction. But, there's a kernel of truth to that because Koo did cost the Falcons one game, at least one game, was the main reason why the Falcons lost one game last year against the Saints. Now, he was also a big factor in why the Falcons won 2 games earlier in the season against the Saints and earlier in the season against the Bucs. So he was kind of 2 for 1. You got 2 wins and 1 loss out of Koo. Now you're adding a second loss, Koo. So it's kind of even in that sense. But certainly, like if we are sitting here and you lose another game, the difference between Raheem's status, as we've discussed before on the podcast, if this team finishes with 8 wins versus 9 wins, makes a substantial difference. And if, that ultimately boils down to Younghoe Koo making or missing a kick in a game, I can see why that Locked On Falcons Insider made that comment, even though I do feel like we're not quite there yet where it's like, this is the reason why we're firing Raheem Morris. But certainly, given the expectations that this team is going to be more successful than what they have shown so far this year, I understand where that sentiment comes from. And to me, speaking on sort of the deja vu of it all, because it's like you can kind of see parallels. Again, it's not a clean parallel, but like if the Falcons do say wind up replacing Koo with a veteran like a Rodrigo Blankenship or whatever, you can see this obvious parallels to how Younghoe Koo came to Atlanta, where you go back to that 2018 season where their longtime kicker, Matt Bryant, was dealing with some injury issues that year. I think Giorgio Tavecchio, they brought in to replace him for 2 or 3 games. Tavecchio kicked really well in those 2 or 3 games. And then the Falcons were like, you know what? Matt Bryant's 106 years old. So let's pivot off of Bryant for this younger, and again, Tavecchio was like 30 at the time, so he wasn't young, but this younger kicker. And the Falcons let Bryant go that offseason. Tavecchio was brought in to replace him, struggled through the preseason in the summer, and then the Falcons were forced to bring Matt Bryant back. Bryant then struggled through a couple of games, and then the Falcons brought in this young kicker from the AAF named Younghoe Koo, who has local ties to Georgia Southern and played with the Atlanta Legends in the AAF. And it'll be fascinating that you can, again, not exactly the same, but Koo kind of has the injuries last year. Obviously Riley Patterson was not the sort of replacement for Koo in that situation, but they bring in, Lenny Krieg, who's a German-born kicker. Tavecchio was an Italian-born kicker or whatever. And then Krieg we'll see what happens with Krieg's status moving forward. My German accent is way better than my Italian one, but and then you wind up potentially bringing in someone like a Blankenship, who's coming off a pretty productive year, has local ties going to the University of Georgia. And so it'll be fascinating to sort of see how this situation resolves itself. Again, I'm not really expecting the Falcons to make an immediate move right now. But it's certainly there is an extremely short leash going to be on Younghoe Koo. And pretty much, I'm not going to say if he misses another kick, because I don't think that's fair to expect him to, basically go bat 1,000 from here on out. But obviously, if there's going to be certain situations where this team is not going to trust Younghoe Koo, right? It's similar to benching Kirk, right? We got to the point in that Raiders game where Kirk threw that pick to start the second half, and the Falcons were just like, we don't trust you anymore. And they just basically ran the ball for the entirety of the second half. And that was sort of the onus to finally make that move. And if we get to a point where the Falcons are going for it, on a 4th and 7 at their 27-yard line or whatever, in the coming weeks, like that's going to be the indicator that they're, they don't trust Koo at that point, and that's the time to sort of make that move. So we'll keep an eye on that moving forward. But the other thing that emerged from this game was a lot of criticism beyond Younghoe Koo was towards the Falcons offensive coordinator and Zach Robinson, and we'll talk about the growth of Zach Robinson, some of the areas of growth for him, and some of the areas that still need to grow for Zach Robinson as hopefully this offense starts to live up to its potential, and we'll do that to continue today's Locked On Falcons. Now, when the opening whistle blows on a new repair, you got to get your crew moving forward with today's sponsor, Supply House. If you order today, you'll see the parts tomorrow on your doorstep. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times are going to keep you from punting on projects, while their industry-leading customer service is always going to have your blind side covered. Supply House will save you time on your next project. And if you need parts fast, they have next day delivery, and their part finder tools and 3D schematics are also going to save you hours on jobs where every detail matters. And it's not just the time you save, it's the money too. If you join their free Trademaster program today, you can score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. So visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use promo code SHNFL5 for 5% off your first order. That's SHNFL5 for 5% off your first order at supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. And today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. With the NFL season back, you know, there's nothing better than being surrounded by fans and being in the stadium. I know Sunday's game didn't go the way we all wanted to, but it's just a unique experience. And if you're feeling that FOMO, Game Time is going to help you get back into Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And the beauty of Game Time is, you know, they give you the opportunity for those last minute tickets. They're always got deals on that. They got the Game Time guarantee where you'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time at the best price, and all the fees are included, no hidden fees at checkout. So the price you see is the price you pay. And of course, you got the panoramic seat view, so you get exactly what you're expecting from your ticket. So check it out on Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets by downloading Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. And you know, $20 can go a long way for concessions at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So make sure you check it out. Terms apply. Again, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. So continuing today's Locked On Falcons, let's talk about, you know, Zach Robinson's evolution as a play caller. You know, a lot of criticism I saw from various folks on Twitter checking, you know, it out. You know, after the game. Don't spend too much time on Twitter during the games because it's just a place of misinformation and bad takes. If you ask me, you know, the great place to be if you want to get, you know, good takes and great information is being a Locked On Falcons Insider. And you can join at the link in the description below. You also get access to the extended All 22 review, which we be dropping probably Wednesday evening. You know, for the Locked On Falcons Insiders, where tomorrow's episode, when we talk about all the things we saw in the film, you'll actually get to see all the things that I'm talking about in that episode with, you know, crisp, high definition, you know, all 22 film analysis. And, you know, we'll get into all of that later. But, you know, talking about Zach Robinson's play calling, and I'll reiterate something I said on yesterday's episode if you missed it. Like, you know, I feel like a lot of the criticism was like on individual plays. And my stance on criticizing individual, like, when, you know, I've been a very vocal critic of Zach Robinson's play calling over the last year, but it's not because of individual plays. Basically, the way I've explained it is like, you know, the Falcons had 71 plays on Sunday. If you took a 71 question quiz, you can miss a couple and still get an A, right? Like, you know, depending on what school system you're at, you know, whether a 90 is an A or 92 is an A, where when I grew up, it was a 92. So that means you could basically miss like 6 questions and still get an A, or 7 questions and still get an A. And so to me, a lot of the criticism with play calling when it comes down to, particularly in this game, was like, oh, well, the Falcons should have ran inside instead of outside, or they should have ran under center instead of out of the pistol or whatever. To me, a lot of that is just kind of nitpicking. That's what it kind of boils down to me. When I'm critical of play calling, and when I have been critical of Zach Robinson's play calling, it's more about structure, right? Because that's not just an individual play where it's like, oh, they could have made a better play call in that situation. Again, they're not all going to be winners over the course of 71 plays or 1,200 plays or 1,000 plays over the course of the entire season. But it's more just like the structure, because the structure impacts more plays, right? Instead of 1 or 2 plays, it's impacting 15 or 20 plays or whatever. And so I do feel like the structure of Zach Robinson's play calling, there were signs of growth, you know, primarily with the play action and a significant increase in the first half. The Falcons dialed up 8 play action passes on Sunday, 6 of which came in the first half. So 6 out of 21 dropbacks is about 29% play action rate, which is about twice the rate. Last year they had 14%, which was a league low. So they were dialing up play action twice as much as they were last year, which to me is definitely a sign of growth. The problem was when they were dialing up play action, it wasn't that effective, right? Obviously that 50-yard touchdown to start things off on the opening drive was very effective, but that was mostly less to do with play calling and design of the play and just Bijan being Bijan, right? Blue magic, walk on water, all the things that you've heard us talk about with Bijan, no notes, all that stuff with Bijan doing, incredible things, right? As we've said, Bijan's the one guy on this team where it's like, hey, Bijan, we need you to do something incredible. And Bijan, obliges as much as we possibly can. But after that 50-yard touchdown, Michael Penix on the 7 subsequent play action passing plays was 2 for 7 for 4 yards. And most of those yards came because Bijan was being Bijan. Like there was a 4-yard gain late in the second quarter on a swing screen pass where Drake London missed his block, trying to block Jacob Parrish, and Bijan turned like what would be a 5 or 6 yard loss into a 4-yard gain, right? And like that's basically it. And so we need to see improvements from the Falcons play action passing attack moving forward. Other areas where they did show improvements, right? Even if it wasn't overall effective, they were asking Kyle Pitts to actually run some routes downfield, right? I know there were at least 3 plays, I think, where he ran a route beyond 5 yards on a play action play, which I believe, if my numbers are correct, eclipses the entire total of times he ran 5+ yard routes for the entirety of last year off of play action, right? Or he only ran 2 routes beyond 5 yards last year off of play action. I believe a total of 13 routes off of play action last year. In this game, he had 4 total routes, and 3 of them he was asked to run a route beyond 5 yards. And then on top of that, we also got a tight end screen to Kyle Pitts. And it was like, man, Zach Robinson is not beating the allegations that he is an everydayer of this podcast. I'll just tell you that based off of how he called the game. But I think those are signs of growth. But we'll see if they can, they gotta at some point, like it's like you're trying. You got to start there. That's the starting point. You got to try to do different things, right? Now, and then you got to actually do the different things, right? You got to execute, right? And that's where the Falcons were falling short, I think, when it comes to the play action. And so I'll give Zach a pass for that. It's why I'm not going to be as critical. We'll see ultimately where I fall when I do a full breakdown on the all 22 tomorrow. And we can get into some of the diversity of the run game and see exactly where that is. But again, I think there are signs of growth. We have 3 more games between now and the bye week. We'll see what growth, if that growth continues over the next couple of weeks. And then we'll see what comes out of the bye week, because that's a classic opportunity for you to be like, okay, well, this is working for us and this is not working for us. Let's make these adjustments. Now, last year, coming out of the bye week, they didn't really do a great job of making those adjustments. So this year, hopefully they'll do a better job, regardless of, how these next 3 games go. So basically, I'm saying all that we're probably like at least 2 months away, right, for me to really make any sweeping judgments on Zach Robinson's play calling and how much better it is or worse, or is it the same in a lot of these areas that we wanted to see growth from this offense and this play caller moving forward. So I still have some thoughts on sort of the whole notion of under center versus shotgun versus pistol. We'll get into that and why I think it's overblown. But, before we get into that, we need to talk about Drake London's status for this week 2 game, because if Drake London isn't healthy to play in week 2, and we'll also talk about Darnell Mooney, that's going to put a lot more pressure on Zach Robinson to kind of have to carry the offense moving forward and prove that he's a better play caller than what he has shown so far. So let's get into that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So the NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure that you're ready for kickoff with this can't-miss offer, because right now new customers can sign up at FanDuel, and when you bet just $5, if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app, and you can use, so many different ways to bet on FanDuel. We love a player prop, right? If you're looking at the over under on the player's yardage total or touchdowns, you can do that, right? You also can get the same game parlay. When you look at a game, you're like, I think like 2 or 3 things are going to happen. You can package it together in a parlay, bet a little, win a lot. It's all available for you at FanDuel. So if you're ready to check out all the different ways that you can win, go head on over to FanDuel.com, download the FanDuel app today, right? And again, if you place that first $5 bet and you win, you get $300 in bonus bets, all at FanDuel. So head on over to FanDuel.com or download the app to place your first $5 bet today. So wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons, we did not get a substantial update from Raheem Morris about Drake London's status. He basically said, we'll know more tomorrow, and then we, as in the team, will know more tomorrow on Tuesday. And then you, as the media and the fan base, will know more on Wednesday when we get that practice report on Wednesday. And so, Ian Rappaport of NFL Network reported Sunday night after the game that Drake is day to day. And as we long know with the Falcons, day to day, week to week, it's like, it's like he could be back in 2 days. He could be back in 20 days. Week to week is like he could be back in 2 weeks. He could be back in 2 months. And so that's where the confusion lies when it comes to these injury updates. And ultimately, like those can be frustrating. But ultimately at the end of the day, you gotta go out there and win the games. I obviously, as someone who is in the business of giving information to the fan base, of interpreting information and giving it back to you, it is frustrating to not have that information. But at the end of the day, they get paid to win football games. And so regardless of whether Drake London's healthy, regardless of whether they're forthcoming about anybody's injury status, ultimately at the end of the day, that's not the problem, right? The problem is, can you win football games? So when it comes to Drake London, I'll echo something that Tori McElhaney of AtlantaFalcons.com said on Monday afternoon on the Falcons Squad show here on Locked On Falcons and Locked On Sports Atlanta, which is you're probably not going to get a clear picture of Drake's status until the very end of the week. And even then, it's still probably a toss-up at that point in time. He's likely to be probably questionable at this point, and I'll add my 2 cents. He'll probably be a game-time decision that we won't really know until an hour and a half before kickoff on Sunday night against the Vikings. So 6:35 ish is when we'll know if Drake London's going to play. And it may also be a similar situation with Darnell Mooney. But, as the resident pessimist here, being that Mr. Drew, my friends call me Negative Nancy. You can call me Mr. Drew. I'm just going to proceed for the rest of the league, just assuming that Drake's not going to play this week. Right. And then hope that we get a positive update. As I often say on this podcast, set your expectations low. And then just maybe the Atlanta Falcons will exceed your expectations, but you got to set them low first. If you're setting your expectations high, it's like you're setting yourself up for disappointment, my friend. And that will be an evergreen message. You can take that to the bank. It's like pay, the only thing that's guaranteed in life is paying taxes, dying, and the Falcons disappointing you. Those are the 3 things that are just guaranteed in life. But, hopefully the Falcons will get Darnell Mooney back this week. I am a little bit more optimistic about that. Going into last week, it was okay, they'll probably sit him week 1, hopefully to get him ready for week 2, where, not to say that you didn't need him for week 1, but you really need to make sure that you have Darnell Mooney for as much as possible. And if he only has to play 16 games in order to maximize his chances of playing 16 games, I take that as opposed to trying to push him to play all 17 games and then, him aggravating an issue and then only playing 12 games or, all that stuff. So, the best version of the Falcons offense is having both Drake London and Darnell Mooney, right? As we say, Drake and Darnell, the all black remake of the, hit Nickelodeon show Drake and Josh with 100% less abuse and bad segue, but hopefully they're abusing the cornerbacks, not abusing producers and actors and all that stuff that was going on Nickelodeon back in the day. But that's that's not what we're here to discuss. But I think part of the reason why we did not see this offense attack down the field as much this past Sunday against the Bucs is because Mooney was out of the lineup. I think another part of it was the struggles of the run game meant that the Falcons kind of had to try to throw a little bit more underneath to kind of replace the rushing yards that the Falcons weren't able to get on the ground. And so, getting Mooney back, I do think opens up the verticality in this offense a little bit more. Now the concern is going to be what happens if you don't have either one of these guys on Sunday against the Vikings. And if that's the case, it's going to be real tough sledding for, I think, this passing attack. And you're going to be really reliant on the run game to kind of carry your offense in a similar way that we saw last year when the Falcons played the Eagles in that week 2 game where, for the first 3 quarters of that game, it was primarily, the run game that was carrying the offense with only a little bit from the passing attack. And then, Kirk and Mooney came alive in the final 2 minutes of the game to go get the go-ahead score and ending with the Drake London touchdown. And so, like, that's kind of what you're kind of hoping against this Vikings team, where it's like the run game can keep it close and the defense can keep it close. And then when we need Penix in the clutch time, as he's consistently come through, he'll be able to drive the length of the field and go win us the game. Hopefully, with a kicker that is reliable. So, those are going to be some of the challenges that the Falcons have to deal with if they don't have either Mooney or London, just because another criticism of Zach Robinson's offense has been, from last year was a lot of it was just kind of Mooney and London being man beaters, being able to get open consistently. And whether it was Kirk or Penix, being able to find those guys, on the short, intermediate, and vertical stuff down the field. And then sort of the one sort of creative thing that Zach Robinson you can give a lot of credit for was him being able to get more out of Ray McCloud than anybody else has, with Ray putting up, career highs as a pass catcher. But a lot of what he was doing with Ray, we broke this down earlier in the summer, with like 50% of his targets were either dig routes or screen passes. So pretty much it was just like him dialing up dagger concepts for Ray McCloud, which, again, no knock on the dagger concept, is a staple concept in the NFL nowadays. But like, it's not as if like, oh, you're breaking new ground in terms of like, oh man, you're doing so creative by running dagger concepts, with Ray McCloud. But outside of that, and maybe if you want to lump in his creative use of Charlie Warner as a blocker, he didn't really do a great job creating opportunities for other guys in this offense last year, which was core to all the Kyle Pitts discourse that we've had over the last, 9 months here, because it's just like, a lot of people looked at it and it's like, that's a Zach Robinson issue, or a lot of people looked at it as a Kyle Pitts issue. And I'm just like, for me, it was a Zach Robinson issue, because it was just like what he was doing from a creative standpoint was, uninspiring at that point. But we'll see what goes. And so I bring all that up just because in a world where you don't have Mooney and London, you really need Zach Robinson to be a lot more creative than what he has shown to date when it comes to being able to feature the Kyle Pittses, the Ray McClouds, the Kadero Hodges, and the Casey Washingtons of the world, as well as the Bijan Robinsons and Tyler Algiers in the passing game. And so, that's going to be a big challenge. And right now, again, based off of the body of work we've had so far, to me, there's not a whole lot of reasons to be optimistic that Zach is going to live up to those expectations as we sit here today. But again, hope springs eternal. And so we'll see what, we're still in the quote unquote evaluation period, is what I was trying to refer to earlier with Zach Robinson. So we'll see what happens on that. Now, last little tidbit I'll say before we duck out of here with the whole shotgun, pistol, under center stuff. I've seen that criticism go around. Basically, my take on that is I feel like all that stuff is kind of overblown, right? Like, again, it goes back to sort of the nitpickiness of criticizing play calling, where it's like, oh, you should have ran this under center, or you should have run this under pistol or shotgun. It goes back to, I remember very vividly back during the 2022 season, the early part of the 2022 season, early in September and October, where the Bengals got off to a slow start. And a lot of the discourse around that offense, I know, particularly on ESPN and NFL Live and that crew, was spent like, oh, with the Bengals coming off their Super Bowl season, what's wrong with the Bengals offense? Well, what they need to do? They need to run more under center play action. And they spent a lot of time, many weeks talking about how that was going to unlock their offense. And then, of course, the Bengals played the Falcons. They didn't run really any under center play. Like, I can't recall if they ran really much play action in that game. And if they did, it was all shotgun stuff, is my recollection. And obviously they annihilated the Falcons. They had the classic Falcon get right game. And then their offense was off to the races for the rest of the year. And it's like that issue became a non-issue. And that's kind of colors my perception of the whole shotgun versus under center or pistol stuff, where it just feels like people make it out to be like, oh, if you do more of your offense via this, like it's going to magically solve your offense. And I just feel like, solve your problems. And I just feel like that's overblown at this point in time. I think playing under center, playing shotgun, playing pistol, we've discussed this before on the podcast. They have their strengths and they all have their weaknesses. Typically the shotgun is very much, the best way to throw the football, but it's probably the worst way to run the football. Under center is often the best way to run the football, but it often can be the worst way to throw the football. And the pistol is kind of the best of both worlds in the sense of it's not as good at passing as a shotgun. It's not as good as running as an under center, but it's better. It's kind of that jack of all trades sort of thing. And it's like, that can be effective. I don't think there's any magic formula. It's the same thing as like, defense where it's like, oh, well, you can play man coverage or you can play zone coverage or you can play cover 2 versus cover 3. And it's like, oh, if you just ran more cover 3 or you ran more cover 2, that'll solve all your defensive problems. And it's like, I think that stuff gets overblown by your average fan and seemingly your average failed backup quarterback in the NFL. Because those tend to be the people that I see harping on that. But, so yeah, we'll see. We'll see on that. Again, like I'm not anti, the Falcons doing more under center. I think they ran 2 under center plays. I think the one was the overthrow to Drake London off of play action early in the game, and then the other one was the goal line run where they tried to run Bijan outside and he got stuffed for a 3-yard loss. And so like if they want to mix in more under center stuff and do a better job, executing on those plays, by all means, I'm all in favor. Crazy concept. I'm pro execution, not execution in the sense of what you do to prisoners. All right, I'm pro in execution in terms of football. I just realized when I said that out loud that doesn't sound right. I'm in favor of doing things that you execute well. Like, so if the Falcons want to do different things and then they execute that well, then it's like, hey, good move. I just don't think like, suddenly like everything's going to click because you decided to run something under center versus pistol or whatever. Like you still got to execute at the end of the day. And that to me is the biggest issue for the Falcons moving forward. But I'm sure we'll talk about that more tomorrow on our all 22 review. So make sure you tune in, check out Locked On Falcons on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, to sate your lust and your appetite between now and then, go check out Locked On NFL as your second listen. 2 shows daily, one with Tyler Rowland, that shot of espresso that you need in the morning, and Tony Wiggins, the second one, taking you to the barbershop for, the raging debates that always come with the barbershop. And Locked On NFL, of course, is available on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.